For a brief history lesson, the main SKUs of Web of Shadows were produced by Shabba Games, a subsidiary under Activision whose most well-known game is Shrek Super Slam. Having come out in 2008, this game came out in that kinda gung-ho era Spider-Man games that came out between the original trilogy and the reboot movies. And until recently, it's actually the only open-world Spider-Man game with its own original storyline. Wanting to distance themselves from the tie-ins, Shabba Games sought to bring a sort of harmony to the more disparate elements of the previous games. With all the discussion around the Spider-Man 2 game, you might be familiar with hearing that while the swinging in that game was amazing, the combat was a bit lacking. Web of Shadows aimed to combine Spidey's mobility and combat into one, with 3 systems that all transition into each other, those being on the ground, in the air, and on the wall? He's like a spider, you see. Keep in mind, this game came out a year before Arkham Asylum, meaning it was entirely removed from the oh-so-familiar counter-combat system that so many games nowadays love to use, including the tie-in games for the Amazing Spider-Man movies, actually. But being spread between 3 systems, it doesn't necessarily do the game any favors. Rather than having any sort of move list where it shows you all the different ways to press
the X, 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 and Y, 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 and X, X, and Y, Y, Y again,
you kinda just have a handful of combos set in stone with different variations on hitting your attack button by either delaying your inputs like Bayonetta, mashing the button, or even just holding it down. And notice I said attack button, singular. That's because there is no YYY to add to the equation here. Instead, your other face buttons are used for jumping, your suit-specific action of shooting web or doing the tendril attack, and the almighty web strike. Yes, the mechanic that the game loves so much that the first thing that Spidey does in the opening cutscene is web strike a bunch of enemies. It's basically your problem solver button. Vulture hanging out where you can't reach him? Web strike. Gotta scale the side of a building? Who needs to crawl up the wall? Just web strike. Nasty symbiote pods turning your fellow man into crazy rabid monsters? Just web strike! Oh shit! The wall combat system doesn't really get its chance to shine either. There always just seems to be a way to circumvent it, whether it be just sitting at the tops of buildings waiting for them to come into standard ground combat range, or just throwing enemies off walls and into the air. That's not to say that the aerial combat is any better. Your only real option outside of web striking enemies like a deranged yo-yo is to use the same air combo over, and over, and over, and over again. At least with the red suit you can pretend like you're rider kicking people. But that wasn't Shabba Games' only selling point here. After all, one of the main things they pushed was the game's atmosphere. It's what sold me on the game at least. The story actually starts where that trailer was, music and everything. You get some voiceovers pertaining to certain story events before you swing down to street level. Spidey's tearing ass through New York looking for Mary Jane, and after the game throws some tutorials at you, he eventually finds her. She berates him for that thing before an ominous shadow begins to approach. She pretty quickly changes tone and urges Spidey to come towards her, but before you know it, it's too late. He gets swallowed up by some tentacles and blacks out, where the game flashes back to where this all started. One day, Venom's attacking the city. No, there's no lead up to that one, we're kinda just dropped in the middle of this scenario too. While he's got Spidey on the ropes, the symbiote just happens to begin jumping off of Venom and onto him. As you would expect, the symbiote envelops him and his suit turns this weird shade of purple that the back of the box lies to you about, but I'm getting off topic. We'll come back to this later. All you need to know for now is, like in the Spider-Man 3 movie tie-in game, you can actually switch freely between the red and black suits at any time. The game teaches you how to throw cars with the black suit, and you proceed to throw cars at Venom until the cutscenes roll around. Venom literally disappears, and it seems like MJ was pretty badly injured during the fight. As she's being carried off though, she hands Spidey a little box, which is apparently his birthday present, to which he oh so excitedly remarks,
I love my present. I love my present.
You follow the ambulance to the hospital, and then a bunch of generic gangsters show up and just start having a shootout in front of the building. Luke Cage shows up to give you a hand, and you dispatch them pretty handily. After some more tutorials and busy work, you eventually get the leaders of the two gangs to meet for a peace treaty. This is where the game's morality system comes into play. You see, throughout the game, you can do certain actions that will increase your red points or your black points? You know what I mean. Red and black, like the suits. No, I know the suit is purple now! Basically, whether you're a hero or an anti-hero. Really, it's not that important. What is sort of important, though, are the choices you make during key moments of the story. The scene will pause, present you with a choice between the red and black options, and events unfold accordingly. For example, in this mission, the treaty seems to be going not so smoothly, and you get the choice of showing the leaders that they were being set up, or just pacifying them by force. Moving on, you go to investigate the aforementioned setup and chase after Black Cat in a mission that's pretty much ripped straight out of Spider-Man 2. Nothing notable about this mission aside from this line.
Who the heck are you? You're not the Hobgoblin or the Green Goblin. You're a cheap knockoff, more like a goblinette. Green Goblin is so 6 years ago. Come on, the kids, they like the Venom and the Sandman.
Felicia gets all hot and bothered, and you get another choice on whether you want to indulge your deepest femme fatale fantasies, or to just grapple away. This one actually does affect the story, but only superficially. If you stay on the red path, then Moon Knight becomes your next quest giver. And if you stay on the black path, then it's Black Cat. You end up going on the same exact missions regardless, though. And nothing notable happens except for this wonderfully awkward cutscene.
Spider-Man sighted!
You don't say. Glad we're finally on the same page now, buddy. Also, that's pretty unmistakably Yuri Lowenthal there. Guess he moved his way up the Spider-Man voice hierarchy.
I am an Avenger!
After a little more putzing around, you eventually storm Kingpin's headquarters and fight the Vulture.
Okay.
After defeating him, you're given another red or black choice. Spidey either pins him to a billboard and leaves him for the cops, or just pins him to the billboard and leaves him there. I guess he calls the police off screen? You go back to your quest giver, and they tell you to investigate a strange case of increased assaults in the area. You eventually end up on a rooftop where a bunch of civilians begin to attack you and some Kingpin goons. They're mysteriously hunched over into a strange spider-like posture, and they explode into black goo upon defeating them. But surely they're just regular people acting weird, right? The police, and more importantly Spidey, seem to think so. But oh well, just toss them right off the side of the building, huh? Not like there's some sort of way for Spider-Man to just non-lethally subdue people. Nope, not at all. Anyways, you go to investigate this weird, mysterious occurrence and... Hey, wait, no, stop. Stop looking at the bottom of the screen. Stop it! But as Spidey is sleuthing around, this happens. Yes, you're attacked by none other than everyone's favorite boy in yellow and blue, Wolverine.
Who?
Come on, man. Wolverine? most popular member of the X-Men? In all seriousness though, this might actually be the most infamous part of the game. Because of the symbiote bonded to Spidey, Wolverine seems to have trouble distinguishing him from the mysterious creatures running amok in New York, calling Spidey one of them. In order to prove that you are indeed the real Spider-Man, he quizzes you on comic book trivia. Over the course of the fight, you either fill or deplete this gauge on the side of the screen. Answering the aforementioned comic book trivia questions correctly nets you red points, and failing them nets you black points. Some deranged civilians also show up in the middle of the fight, and it becomes a sort of three-way brawl. You can either attack the enemies alongside Wolverine to net more red points, or keep beating on Wolverine for black points. It's actually pretty interesting. Honestly, probably the best use of these mechanics in the entire game. Like your other choices though, it doesn't actually really end up mattering in the long run, as either way, once the fight is over, he decides to help you track down the infected civilians. For what it's worth, I think the Wolverine-Spidey tag team is probably the best team-up in the game too. If only for this goofy exchange.
So, what are your thoughts on the new duds?
This some kind of damn superhero fashion show? 'Cause I got some orange and brown tights that put you to shame.
What, not a fan of the new me?
First off, you smell like death. Second, you look like one of those emo kitties they got all over the internet gibbering on about how hard their life is when they've never even known true pain.
Oh my god, you have a My Face page, don't you? Dork.
I do not.
Ah, you totally do.
Shut up, kid.
Will you add me as a friend? I'll poke you, you poke me back.
I said shut up!
After some more busy work, you eventually find the source of the outbreak. Venom has been leaving some nasty symbiote pods all over the city, and he's been pulling civilians into them to turn them into his own spider soldiers. You chase after him in a sequence that ends up going on for way too long, but eventually you get to have your rematch against him. Before he eventually just manages to get away again. This is when S.H.I.E.L.D. and Black Widow arrive. They've begun quarantining citizens that they suspect of being infected with the symbiote, and right after the last boss fight involving an unnecessarily long chase, you get another one. This time with Electro, which, by the way, is sorta reminiscent of the chase from Ultimate Spider-Man. Shabba really borrowed a lot of ideas from the older games. Eventually, this leads you back to one of the quarantine camps where Black Widow blows him away. And his, sister? What the...
I'll allow it.
His sister jumps onto his cold, dead body and somehow infects him with the symbiote. The newly revived Electro causes a huge explosion and gets away. The symbiote outbreak is pretty much in full swing, and the game becomes really boring. But I'll highlight one of the missions you do in this sequence because it's just so goofy. So Black Widow rallies all the S.H.I.E.L.D. soldiers together to hold the line, as if a horde is gonna swarm their location. But when you load into the mission, there's maybe like 5 guys outside. So, okay, easy enough to defend. But then somehow the perimeter gets breached despite it clearly being fine. And the super dangerous horde of symbiotes attacks with a maximum of like 2 guys at a time. And then S.H.I.E.L.D. proceeds to carpet bomb the inside of their safe zone? It's ridiculous. But that's a mission accomplished right there. A+, high score. Anyways, the last half of the game pretty much just consists of doing missions for S.H.I.E.L.D. between each boss fight. First off is your unfinished business with Symbiote Electro. The boss fight is annoying, and it's not really noteworthy at all. Of course, at the end of the fight, it's another red or black choice. Spidey either literally stands next to Electro and encourages him to overcome the symbiote on his own,
Yes. You and I are friends now.
or beats the symbiote out of him and tells him that it's his sister. Fun fact though, Electro is actually voiced by Liam O'Brien in this game.
What is that?
That thing? It's with your sister.
Die, you freak! I need some payback, man. Tell me where I'll fry him.
You meet back up with Mary Jane and Luke Cage, where the only notable thing that happens is MJ going from super perplexed by her shotgun
So how do you use this?
to saying this.
You know what? MJ can take care of herself just fine.
Then it's off to the next boss fight. Next up, Symbiote Wolverine. After sacrificing himself to save some civilians from the symbiotes, they end up taking him over. You have a pretty fun boss fight against him before it's another red or black choice. Red Spidey once again just stands next to him while encouraging him to fight the symbiote on his own, and Black Spidey rips him in half. Metal! Meeting back up with Cage and MJ, your alignment decides whether or not Spidey parts with her on good terms. One more escort quest later and we're caught up with the prologue. Remember that? The game kinda hopes that you don't, at least on the red path. Since, in that scenario, MJ's just kinda mad at Spidey for no reason, even if they parted on good terms. This is actually the final stretch of the game, since the open world closes and you're pretty much railroaded through the last few missions. Now we're on to Symbiote Black Cat. You beat her down, MJ shows up halfway through to make herself a liability, and then Spidey once again uses too much of his super strength on her. I think the voice clip they use of him calling out to her is actually the same exact one from the first fight. Throw an edit in here.
Cat! Cat! Oh god!
It seems like Black Cat is critically wounded, and here is where you're presented with the only choice in the game that actually seems to matter. Spidey will either give her up the shield for medical attention, that's the good path, which reaffirms Spidey's dedication to MJ somehow, or Spidey bonds her to his symbiote, which doesn't turn her back into her monster form, but actually turns her into his very own Symbiote Waifu. Following this, the Vulture returns after disappearing from the plot, and he's bonded to the symbiote now, somehow. He calls Spidey out to fight because he still has part of the symbiote on him, and he wants to absorb his portion of the symbiote? I don't really know. So you head out to fight Symbiote Vulture and the camera before you're transported to what seems to be the final choice of the game. Spidey here is about to set off the sonic bomb to kill all the symbiotes. Oh yeah, at one point in the game, Spidey breaks into the raft so that he can break the Tinkerer out of jail to make a sonic bomb to kill all the symbiotes. That part of the game kinda sucked, and I didn't really feel the need to talk about it. Vulture tries to talk him out of it, and whether or not he sets it off depends on the choices you've made throughout the game. If you've made majority red choices, he sets it off, and if you've made majority black choices, he doesn't. And so the day is saved! Except the fact that the symbiotes are making one last stand trying to take over a shield helicarrier. So you're off to wipe out the last of the symbiotes. You fight some symbiote-infected shield soldiers before the final boss shows up. Venom has somehow grown to kaiju size, and it's up to you to stop him. And now I hear you ask, viewer, how could Spidey possibly defeat such a giant creature? You web strike him! Yeah! Like 12 times. Spidey gains the upper hand by calling out to Eddie Brock inside of the symbiote, eventually getting him to come out, revealing that the symbiote has grown too strong, even for him. Spidey dramatically holds his hand out to him, and you're left with one final red or black choice. On the black path, Spidey slings a web around Venom's neck, sending him flying into one of the jet turbines, destroying both the helicarrier and the Venom kaiju in the process. And if you go red, Eddie bats Spidey out of the way and crawls into the turbine by himself. I have a little bit more to say about this, but I'll get to it in the next section. This is where we get into the 4 potential endings you can get at the end of the game. If you go down the red path and choose to give Black Cat up the shield, you get an ending of Spidey and MJ swinging off together. Pretty standard stuff. If you go down the red path but choose to save Black Cat yourself, you get an ending of Spidey leaving MJ a voicemail saying he did what he needed to do to win, before walking away from the camera dejected. Going down the black path and choosing to save Black Cat gets you an ending where the two of them overlook the city, declaring it to be theirs as they overlook their new symbiote army. And the weirdest ending of them all, if you go down the black path but chose to give Black Cat up, effectively siding with MJ, Spidey gives us this monologue as he overlooks his army.
MJ, she thinks she can just walk away. She never understood what it means to have power. Neither did I. But now... I understand what power really is. You'll be mine again, Mary Jane. No one will ever say no to me again.
And it's a bit... problematic. In an effort to try and make that story summary be as concise as possible, there are still some nitpicks I have with the story and about the game in general. I couldn't really smoothly fit any of this into the summary proper, so let's tackle these before the conclusion. Some of you might remember that near the beginning of the story, MJ gives Spidey a birthday present. Thought it was gonna have some sort of payoff in one of the endings? Maybe the endings where he doesn't end up with MJ, he kinda looks at it longingly, tosses it away in one of the bad endings or something? Any sort of payoff whatsoever? What do you mean you forgot? Actually, never mind. The writers seem to have forgotten about it too. Where's Aunt May? She's kinda just absent throughout the whole game. No one even mentions her in passing. Not even once. Is this some sort of alternate universe version of the Back in Black storyline, where Spidey becomes darker and edgier after Aunt May gets shot? There's a Daily Bugle article in the game talking about the Superhero Registration Act, so it could be after Civil War. That would explain why Captain America and a ton of other heroes are missing too. Speaking of the Daily Bugle, where's J. Jonah Jameson? This would be the best chance that he has to paint Spider-Man as a menace. You specifically go to the Daily Bugle at one point in the game, so I don't see why he couldn't have been there. During the Wolverine fight, Spider-Man doesn't know that the deranged civilians are symbiotes yet, or that's kind of what's implied at least. Even then, in the red ending where you set off the sonic bomb, it shows that all the symbiote soldiers are still regular people underneath. Surely the good version of Spider-Man wouldn't want Wolverine murdering a bunch of innocent people. Why does Spider-Man look so angry in this game? It makes sense for the edgy symbiote suit to have like the angry eyes, but even his normal costume looks super angry all the time. Okay, and I said I would get back to this, so why bother with the final choice of the game if the morality system has already judged you based on your choices by then? And the fact that Eddie Brock dies regardless of your choice, it's kinda pointless. If Spider-Man has become so transparently villainous by the end of the Black ending, why doesn't he just absorb the Venom Kaiju's symbiote power? Vulture seems to imply that you can absorb your symbiotes from each other, and Spidey even seems to do this to Wolverine in the Black Path. And since Spidey seems to have gone off the deep end in the Black endings, it would have been cool to have, like, symbiote god Spider-Man? On that note, why isn't the Venom Kaiju affected by the sonic bomb at the end of the game? In fact, in either ending, he's hiding completely out of sight until the final boss fight. Maybe instead of having you storm the SHIELD helicarrier, the Venom Kaiju attacks Spidey on top of the building where the bomb is? So instead of fighting him all the way up there, you just fight him on top of a building or something. Anyway, nitpicks over. So that was Spider-Man Web of Shadows. Did it hold up as well as I wish it did? Not particularly. Does it deserve to be forgotten like the title of the video suggests? I mean, it brings some fairly interesting ideas to the table, but especially with Insomniac's upcoming game taking its spot, being a new open-world Spider-Man game with an original story, the only saving grace this game really has going for it is its unique concept. Even then, I get the feeling that if Insomniac's title does particularly well, it won't be long before we see symbiotes popping up in a future title of theirs. As I mentioned briefly earlier, I played through this game twice, once going all in on the black path and once going all in on the red path. Each playthrough was about 8 hours long, with story content consisting of, I'd say, about 40% of the playtime. Not bad considering that it's an open world game, but the problem comes in that the other 60% of the game isn't really interesting at all. Between major story beats, the game has you doing these MMO-style quests of killing X amount of Y enemy type, or completing a certain mission type a certain number of times. Not only is progression in the story locked off by these quests, but the only side quests to speak of are more of these types of quests. Killed 50 symbiotes? Why not kill 100 symbiotes now? It came to the point where after beating certain missions and unlocking story missions, I would just swing over every random encounter in the streets. There's no point in continuing to indulge in the game just giving me random busy work to do. There's not really any sort of endgame content either. So unless you create a save file right before going into that final stretch of missions, you're booted back to the main menu. And after you watch the credits twice, you're allowed to go back into New Game Plus mode where you keep all your upgrades and stuff like that. But unless you're crazy like me and actually think that there's like significant story differences on both paths, or you need to capture video footage or something like that, there's not really any point in going through the game a second time. The game's morality system leaves a lot to be desired. It definitely seems like the team was excited to make a story about Spider-Man going rogue and falling to the dark side, per se, but everything seems kinda compromised by the fact that the story has to push you through the same beats no matter which path you're going down. Between the crappy MMO light mission design, the scattershot story and morality system, and the lackluster combat system, there's not really much here that you need to experience. Especially because the game's not really readily available unless you specifically seek it out. Well, it breaks my heart to say, but it's perfectly skippable. Fun fact though, there's actually concept art out there for a Web of Shadows 2 made by Shaba Games. The lead character designer posted some art of Carnage and Mysterio. He said that the team wanted to take advantage of the more underused aspects of Mysterio's character, probably in a sort of Arkham Asylum Scarecrow kind of way. Eventually though, Beanox ended up using his Mysterio design for Shattered Dimensions, and with Marvel casting Jake Gyllenhaal as Mysterio in Spider-Man Far From Home, you Mysterio fans have something to look forward to. What? Oh, you just wanted to hear about the swinging? It's alright. You can swing off poles and stuff like that, so it's pretty fun. You can build up some pretty good speed, and it generally feels pretty good to swing around, so add some extra points onto the game score just for that. Oh, actually wait, the shocker isn't in this game. So actually, take those points back. And actually, all the other points that the game earned too. 0 out of 10. Too much web strike, needs more shocker.